In 2 days, Wisconsin goes back to the polls in a rare recall election of Republican Governor Scott Walker. 16 months ago, this fight began with the freshly elected Walker pushing through legislation which stripped collective bargaining rights for most of the state's public employees, setting off a cascade of dissent from opponents and making Walker only the third governor in the nation to face a recall. Here with us now from Madison, Wisconsin, is Lisa Graves, the executive director of the Center for Media and Democracy, who's been tracking all the outside influence in this race so far. So nice to see you this morning, Lisa.
Thanks so much, Melissa.
Okay, so with 2 days to go until the recall, Scott Walker is leading. Tell me how you're feeling on the ground about this.
Well, we've been covering this election and actually these issues since last winter, and it looks as though the polls are neck and neck. And so what we're seeing is a huge battle on the ground to get the vote out. The last poll we saw was that there was a dead heat.
Okay, so in this case, we've been talking a little bit about the president making an affirmative case for himself. In a recall, obviously, it's about Scott Walker, but is there an affirmative case to be made for Tom Barrett, or is it just about sort of taking Scott Walker out?
Well, I've seen a lot of statements on behalf of Scott Walker being made. I've seen a lot of statements being made on behalf of Tom Barrett and his record. He made a showing in the debate talking about what he would do if he were governor to bring people to the table. Scott Walker said that he basically stood by his statement about the divide and conquer approach that he took. And so it's not just about Scott Walker. I think in many ways this election is about a lot more than what's happening in Wisconsin. It's about the influence of outside money. And a long time ago and far, far away, there was a real Tea Party that resisted having governors who were beholden to foreign powers and big money interests like the King of England. And here in Wisconsin, you've got a situation in which the governor, through a loophole in Wisconsin election law, has raised millions of dollars from out-of-state billionaires. And that's certainly an issue in Wisconsin. A lot of people are talking about that.
Yeah, actually, let's talk a little bit about that because, I'm going to make an argument a little bit later that I think there's ways that this is not a bellwether, that, even if Scott Walker were to stay in office, that does not mean, for example, that President Obama will lose in November. But I do think that clearly this issue of money and the impact of outside money in the election is going to tell us something about what we're likely to see for the rest of the summer and the fall. So just talk to me a little bit about this fact that Scott Walker has outraised and outspent Tom Barrett 12-1.
Well, that is really astonishing. It's the most expensive race, I think, in Wisconsin history, and certainly the governor who's received the most money from out-of-state interests ever in the history of the state of Wisconsin. But you also that's just not the whole story. You also have money being spent by the millions by groups like Americans for Prosperity, which is David Koch's funded group. It's David Koch is the chair of that group. He's the billionaire that everyone has been talking about, and his group is crisscrossing the state with a bus tour that they claim has nothing to do with the election, just like they claim their ads have nothing to do with the election. That kind of money, that outside influence money, is amazing. And what's also amazing is that another major network has a reporter embedded on one of those buses, and he said that they're getting 25 people showing up at some of those bus tour events. If we had a national reporter covering every time there were 25 progressives here in town or across the state, we'd have wall-to-wall coverage on every network in the country because there's a huge grassroots movement in Wisconsin. That's not to say there isn't grassroots movement on the right or the left, but the movement coming out for progressive events has been huge, and we've been covering that since the beginning. Yeah,
so, I find that really, again, to me, as we were looking at sort of the Wisconsin numbers, boy, Wisconsin, you guys vote. The turnout in Wisconsin sort of traditionally is well up over 65, well up over 70% in presidential elections, even in midterm elections. So this really does feel like Koch brothers and other kind of outside money versus sort of the pure power of turnout and voting. And I think in that sense, it does feel like maybe this is about what kind of democracy we're going to have going forward, even beyond kind of the union policies that are at stake.
Well, I think that's right. I think what you're going to see in this election and in the next 5 months is an enormous amount of outside influence. Karl Rove said he's going to spend $1 billion. That's more than there are people in the country. $1 billion versus over 300 million Americans, and that's outside money. Then you've got these big super PACs that are raising money by the millions through the changes since Citizens United, and then you have groups like Americans for Prosperity that are running ads. You've got the trade groups like American Petroleum Institute and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce course, that are going to be involved. You've got the Republican Governors Association that's already spent big in Wisconsin so far. And so this is going to be the most expensive election in American history, and it's going to be a battle, I think, in many respects, for whether this country is a real democracy or whether the corporate powers, the corporations and the CEOs, are going to use so much money that they get to choose who wins.
Thank you, Lisa Greaves. I appreciate you letting us know what's happening there.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thanks. And up next, why the conventional wisdom about Wisconsin and what it means for the country might be wrong. I'll explain after the break.